Welcome, my name is Colleen Tauke and I'm a sewing specialist at Fons & Porter. In this tutorial, we will create the blocks used in the quilt called Time Enough. To get the pattern for this, visit our website. We are going to be using 10-inch squares, so we have an assortment of wonderful blues and navies here in 10-inch squares, and then we're also using a light background fabric and a continuous blue fabric for the horizontal sashing strips that you see behind me in the quilt. Okay, from the 10-inch squares, we're going to set aside a certain number for smaller squares later on. We're going to work with the big ones first. So follow along with the directions in your pattern. We're going to take a 10-inch square of one of our prints and a 10-inch square we've cut from the light fabric, and we're going to make hourglass blocks. So the first thing we're going to do is to mark a diagonal across our fabric, corner to corner, and that is going to become the cutting line for our block. Make the line a lot dark enough so you can see this. And we're going to put then it face to face with one of our print triangles. And this will be the first step in making our hourglass blocks. Now, since this is a long space to stitch across and to move it to my sewing machine, I'm going to put in a few pins, and I always put my pins perpendicular to my stitching. That way it'll be easy for the machine to either jump over or I can remove them as I go. Now we're going to come over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch from the drawn line. So I'm going to place my presser foot along the marked line, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch from that all the way across. Just simple sewing all the way across this, and that will create the first step in our hourglass block, and then we'll go on to create the entire block. You're going to be doing this over and over through quite a few blocks, so you'll get really used to making hourglasses. You'll be really good at them. As we approach the very far end of this block, I'm going to leave my needle down in place. I'm going to rotate the block and stitch to the other side of the line. Instead of breaking thread, I can just make this one big continuous stitching. Come on and to the other side, and then stitch again a 1/4 inch from my drawn line all the way across. Now I'm using red thread, and that's for your benefit. If I were making this quilt, I'd probably be using a light cream or a white thread. But so that you can tell where we've stitched, it's bright red. Now it's like as if we've stitched a railroad track across our block. Okay, then we would take it over to the iron and heat set that seam a long ways across, so we should always take time to do the pressing. And then we're going to come in and we're going to cut these pieces apart down between. Now my line has disappeared because I used a friction pen to mark my diagonal, and when it is warmed, the line disappears, which makes a great tool for the quilt room. Okay, we're going to cut diagonally, corner to corner, all the way across. And this will then create 2 large triangle squares that match. And then we're going to come in and press those. So press the seam allowances toward the darker fabric. This is important because you're going to have what we call opposing seams when you go to do your hourglass. Okay, I'm going to do the second piece. Sometimes I like to stack them while I'm pressing, so I'll come in and I'll put the second one. The board is warmed up nicely, so I can come in, set that seam, and then open it up also, one on top of the other. And once they are pressed nice and neatly, then I'm going to take it back and mark again. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mismatch these, laying them right sides together. What we want to do is bring the seams here opposing to each other, lined up nicely. And you can feel that with your hands as you go across. And what we're going to do is the same process one more time. We're going to mark diagonally across the block, just like this. We're going to stitch on each side of that 1/4 inch, to the right and to the left of it. And then when we get done stitching, cutting and opening, we would have, here I'll simulate it, we've stitched it, oops, fold it correctly, we've stitched it, we've cut it apart and pressed them, and voila, we have 2 hourglass blocks in the large size. Once you've done all of the large hourglass blocks like this, then we also need to create the small ones that you see behind me that are kind of like the cornerstones within the quilt. And what we do for that is to take those set aside 10-inch squares that I talked about. Well, time to take them back out. We are now taking those and we are going to cut them into 4 matching 5-inch squares. So I've brought my rotating mat because it makes it easy to always be pressing or cutting in the correct format away from yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my 5-inch cutting line there. And I'm not going to disturb my fabrics, but I'm going to rotate and cut the next line across. I'm always checking to make sure I'm lined up in the 5-inch line. Whoops, 5-inch line there. And now I've got the smaller blocks that I need to make the hourglass blocks within our quilt, those cornerstones. Those are created in the very same manner. We do have a tool though for a smaller block like this. Instead of marking just the diagonal, we can use a 1/4 inch seam marker that Fons and Porter has created, and it simulates that diagonal with the center marking on the tool. It's kind of a black with a yellow outline, and you can then mark each of the stitching lines that you're going to be using. Now think about each of them. They're a little bit different. The large blocks, we stitched a 1/4 inch from the diagonal. Here we're going to be actually stitching on these lines. So then it looks like this. Did the same thing, stitched down, jumped to the other side, came back, cut them apart. So if it were laying here, it would look like this. So I've got those same pieces like we did last time, but smaller version. Then we match them up again, opposite colors, snugging those seams up against each other. We can use the 1/4 inch seam marker again, diagonally, matching corner to corner, mark on both sides, stitch, and cut them apart, and those will yield these small hourglass blocks. Now, when we got done making our large hourglass blocks, we left them that size. For the small ones, we're going to come in, and if I were doing this in my sewing room, I would be using my rotating mat, because I would have a whole stack of these now created. And in order to make them the correct size, we are going to be using the Fons and Porter square up ruler. When I first looked at this, I thought, oh, ingenious. There is a plastic or a vinyl piece that gives you a ridge along here. And when we go in to cut, we can line it up wonderfully and it stays put. So I would, if I were home, I would lay out 4 blocks at once and come in, and I'm going to orient this so that there's a nice seam across there. That last seam we put in will come up right against that shield. Okay, I'm going to be trimming these to 3 1/2, which means half of that is 1 3/4. So 1 3/4 is my center spot here. And I want to make sure that I'm out here at 3 1/2 and over here at 3 1/2. And I'm going to be trimming away just a little bit on each side. So those come away. Oops. And I would go ahead and do that 2 sides on each of my blocks, then rotate the entire thing, not disturbing any of them, and come in and do the same thing for the other side. I need to trim both directions. So here we go. We're putting what is the center, 3 1/2 in half is 1 3/4. That's the very center of my block. 3 1/2 here, 3.5 here. I know I have it in the right place. And then I trim here and here. Making sure that I get through all the thicknesses. Okay. Now, I would have then the 3.5-inch cornerstones that go into this quilt. Now let's look at the quilt behind us. We've got the large hourglass blocks joined into rows with a light colored rectangle. So those go all the way across. Then we also have dark sashing bars, the navy blue, and the small cornerstones going all the way across. So we would create rows, join the rows to create this quilt. Time enough. For more of our video tutorials, visit our website. Thanks for joining me today.